Welcome to the Good Faith Podcast. I'm David French with Curtis Chang, and I'm really excited about this podcast. I think I say that every week.
You
but I
do,
guess
David, every week.
I
But
do.
that's okay. You're an excitable fellow.
Well, and if I'm not excited about my own podcast, why am I doing it, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, but I am genuinely excited about this podcast. We have a guest, a great guest, and, to continue our Good Faith tradition of pre-credit for guests. So, giving Curtis credit for guests in the previous several string. Well, producer Chris gets credit for our current guest, Jason Vanderground. Jason is president of Haven, which is a creative hub. I'm not sure what a creative hub is, but it sounds fascinating. It's a branding and marketing firm based in Michigan, and really salient for our purposes, he serves as a campaign manager for He Gets Us, which is he guides a 100-person team of researchers, creatives, media, and PR professionals. And He Gets Us is about introducing America, or reintroducing, or introducing for the first time America to Jesus. And one thing that we learned in the green room before we started is that Vanderground means what? On the ground, from the ground? Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, son of. So
Son
in a
of.
lot of
Okay.
Dutch last names, Van is usually son, and then der is of. And then so whatever the next syllable is kind of like tells you something about that person. So
So
this
you
is how it was
can
explained to me. Yeah, son of the
you
ground.
can never be called an elitist, because you can say,
Yeah.
look, I'm a son of the ground. Like
And that was my upbringing. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. My dad was a pipe welder, worked outdoors in the winter, welding pipes that connected, large oil holding additive things. And my mom was a grade school teacher. So yeah, very, very Midwestern, middle class, working class upbringing, which I think sets you up really well for adult life.
So tell us, let's just introduce folks to start the conversation. What is the He Gets Us campaign, including the what and the why? What is it, and why are you doing it?
Yeah, so He Gets Us it started as a large national advertising campaign. We actually test marketed it last Thanksgiving. So we did it 10 markets, 10 cities, had phenomenal results. We'd put ads on local Dallas Cowboys games and would see huge spikes in website activity, and people would want to go on the website and chat and text and get connected and sign up for Bible reading plans. We were like, oh, wow. And then we launched the campaign nationally in March, around March Madness, the NCAA basketball tournaments. And we've seen this huge intersection of kind of putting the message of Jesus right in the middle of really big cultural moments and having people go, it's like a pleasant surprise, or like, what does that mean? And so it's really meant to be a conversation starter, a thought starter. And it's just been a fascinating ride for the last 6 months.
So, Jason, I think the immediate question that gets asked when something very high publicity gets revealed is, who's behind this? Like, who is behind this in terms of who's funding it, who's originating it, who's heading it, whose theology is behind this? And I think the last is especially probably important to some folks who think, okay, wait, you're going out there with this big advertising campaign, you're running ads in the Super Bowl or NFL games saying Jesus is like this. And people who are followers of Jesus is like, is this going to be an accurate picture of Jesus? So can you kind of speak to those kinds of immediate concerns? Who's behind it? How and where does this fit in all the different ways that people can view Jesus?
Yeah. So, this is all run through an organization called the Signatory. And the Signatory, one of their charitable nonprofit programs is He Gets Us. And so that allows many families and individuals who they tend to be high net worth individuals, but not always. They're actually a mix of income individuals and wealth individuals who are just passionate about seeing the real Jesus in the Bible represented in mainstream society. And so it started with this really troubling kind of problem statement, which was like, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? And so for us as Jesus following Christians, the Bible clearly lays out, Jesus said, people are going to know you're following my example by the way that you love and treat other people. It's that fundamental interaction with your fellow human being. And Jesus modeled for us exactly how to do that in the Gospels. But when we talk to people who are spiritually open but very skeptical of Christianity, they look at the church and sometimes Christians and they'll say three things. They're like, I see hypocrisy, and then I see judgmentalism, and I see some discrimination. And I'm guilty of perpetuating those things as well. Like, we're trying to follow a perfect example as just flawed individual human beings. It's no wonder that we're coming up short. And so all we're trying to do is point to the real, true, authentic Jesus in the Bible, just studying the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and other passages that speak to Jesus, and then trying to find really interesting ways to to frame that for people who are spiritually open but very skeptical of Christianity.
Or don't know anything about Christianity at all is what I would presume. For some of the ads seem to be just a very sort of basic introduction to get people to want to inquire more.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. When we did our original research back in 2021, we spent like 5 months doing. We did a really deep quality. We went quantitative study of the American people. Then we did a qualitative. We did a quant. All of this research. I mean, we spent like 5 months and almost $1 million just to learn the American people. And so we understood that there are people who are just avowed non-Christians. They're like, I'm an atheist, I'm an
Mm-hmm.
agnostic, I'm a scientist. I am not interested in Christianity at all. Please leave me alone. And we go, okay, fine. Like, let's not bother each other right now. But then there's this huge group in the middle who says, I'm very spiritually open. I actually really like Jesus's value system. And this is really, we should talk about this more. They like his value system, but they're not actively like following him with their lives. But they actually, David, to your question, they understand the Bible and Jesus a little bit more than I think what we typically give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these moments of openness that they have, especially like parents, new parents. There's something about kids in the home where people go, we're not as post-Christian, maybe as
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what you'd think, reading stuff from Pew and Gallup and others.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and we'll put the links to some of the ads in the show notes. But each one of them has a theme, that I've seen: the rebel, um, outrage, the birth, the influencer, dinner party. And what's interesting is each one of these ads is not a, a theological statement so much as a biographical statement. So it's not John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And it's not that John 1 theological statement. It's much more about, here are the characteristics of Jesus and how he fit in his time and how he was identified in his time, translated into the modern framework. And so talk about that choice, the choice to sort of say, introduce Jesus not through theology, but through biography.
Yeah. So what happened in that research is we put a lot of different historical religious figures in front of people in a research
Mm-hmm.
context and kind of said, tell us what you think of each of these. What value system do you see, say, in Muhammad and Abraham and Gandhi and Buddha? And let's put Jesus in the line. Like, what value system did they represent? What value system do you want for you and your family? And it was amazing that Jesus is the person that the American people still identify with clearly. And there were four main values that they saw in him that they wanted for themselves. Four of the six were highly aligned. And the number one thing is seeking peace. And so, especially at a time when the biggest felt need people have right now is toxic relationships, that they used to have certain relationships with family, friends, neighbors that would give them joy and satisfaction that has now been removed for a variety of reasons. They're looking for this example. They need peace, inner peace, to be able to make peace with oneself and to be able to make peace then with those around you. But there were three other things that they said they saw in Jesus that they also want for themselves. And it was welcoming, accepting, and loving to all. And so those four, they have incredible respect for Jesus and what he stood for. And so we just said, well, let's just lean in and have the conversation there. I mean, it's what we do in our personal relationships. You meet somebody new, and it's like, let's figure out what we have in common. It's like you guys enjoy, baseball fantasy. It's like, all right, let's talk about that. Let's build around commonality. And I've heard from some people that have been skeptics all their life have said, every time a Christian would approach me with kind of the basic message of Christianity, what I always thought that they were saying is, we think you, skeptic, need to become just like us, Christian. And what I hear and he gets us is you're saying, no, Jesus was one of me. Jesus was like you, went through all the trials and temptations that you went through, saw the ups and downs of life because he was fully human. He was also fully God too. And we hope that eventually in their spiritual journey, they'll get to the point of understanding that. But I mean, just to lean into some commonality where they go, I'd love to have that conversation about what Jesus went through and how he's relevant. That's a huge win considering there's like 134 million people that are kind of, what a lot of organizations refer to as this movable middle, either very skeptical or really casual in their following of Jesus.
So, Jason, I think there might be a lot of listeners who are hearing what you're saying. It's like, well, that sounds great. Like, go for it. Congratulations, and cheering you on. But that hasn't been the unanimous response you've gotten. Can you speak to controversy around this campaign and critique? Because in this day and age, nothing we can release into the world apparently without controversy and critique. So, what has been your experience in terms of negative reaction to this campaign?
Yeah, I think we've found sometimes maybe if people just see an ad and that's all they see, and they're like, "Hey, what's the angle here?" or "Who's behind this?" or "Where are you trying to go with this?" But we're finding that the more people learn, like David said, even seeing multiple commercials, going to the website, if you read our About Us statement on the website, you really get a sense for who's behind it. One of the other managers in the campaign, he said it's kind of like when you watch a State Farm commercial and it's Patrick Mahomes and it's really entertaining. You're probably not surprised to find out that there's insurance salespeople behind it. And so that's a little bit of what we've done to say, yeah, oh, there are Jesus followers behind this, but we're trying to be really respectful and empathetic and communicate to a people group just like you would in mission work anywhere else in the world on their terms, in their language, their customs. So we're trying to be relevant to them in order to get them really over what is their first bridge in their faith journey, which is the respect bridge. They have to be able to respect and see Jesus as personally relevant before they can ever get to the divinity bridge. And that was something that really came out of just understanding how the American people think right now that I think is really helpful for, a lot of the Christian community to understand.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of I've been writing and talking quite a bit especially in the last couple of months about there is polling data that came out that should be really sobering to the church, and that polling data says that a very large percentage of evangelicals, and not just self-described evangelicals, but people who meet a kind of theological test of evangelicals, that even in this sort of subset of evangelicals, a very large percentage of them do not understand who Jesus was theologically. So they don't understand that they believe the heresy that Jesus is the first and greatest created being created by God, that or north of 40% believe that Jesus was not God at all. And so there's an enormous amount of theological ignorance about Jesus, but there's a lot of knowledge about morality. Okay, so there's a huge, overwhelming percentage of self-described evangelicals who understand and agree with sort of traditionally Orthodox Christian statements of sexual morality, even as they don't know really much about who Jesus was, which is an interesting kind of inversion, it seems to me, of the priorities that has a lot of consequences. you seem to be driving in a different lane entirely. And that different lane seems to be, we're not diving into the theology, and we're not diving into the morality. We're instead diving into sort of the characteristics of Jesus. And just interested in sort of this dichotomy that you often see between theology and morality, and this dive into the characteristics seems to be kind of a separate way entirely. And I know we're kind of going over some ground we've just went over, but the flip side of the theology of, we explain why not dive into the theology. Is it a similar analysis as to sort of why not to dive into the morality? Like the world is going to hell. Here's Jesus.
Well, a couple things there. I think I think it was Shoemaker who really talks about seeing himself as standing at the doorway, maybe standing right close to the sidewalk. I kind of imagine like a retail storefront, in a busy, and the shopkeeper is just right there at the doorway talking to pedestrians as they go back and forth. Like that's a different conversation than say, oh, now I've entered the store and now I'm moving back into a further room and a further, like each room you would have like a different conversation in. But what we're trying to do is say, with millions of Americans in 7 seconds or some 15 or 30, could we have a little passing by conversation where they go, hey, but was that a is that a Jesus message, like at the baseball game? Like Jesus forgave errors, but you never know. I mean, we've had stories where we've been sponsoring several MLB teams, and so there was a St. Louis Cardinals game, one of the teams we sponsor, and we just put this sign up in the outfield, and then it's visible on TV, and it says Jesus forgave errors, and we're like, oh, we're kind of having fun with the language, and we got a message from this guy, and he goes, so I made like a really critical mistake at work, and it cost me my job instantly. He never says what it is. He decides not to share it, and he says this mistake started to unravel me. My relationships, it was starting to affect everything. And he basically says I was getting to the point where I thought I was going to end my life over this. I did not think I was going to be able to get past this mistake. And he goes, I'm watching the game and it says Jesus forgave errors. So he forgives me for what happened there. I can go on, and we're like, wow, and I hear stories like that all the time. And it's just, you just never know when you put just a little tiny nugget from Jesus, which is his truth, in front of millions of people, as little encouragements and little connective things. You have no idea what the Holy Spirit is going to do with those things. And one of the biggest follow-on actions that people do is when you get interested in the central character, you want to read the text. And the biggest action we have people take is they sign up to read, they want to read the Bible. So we have we have 3 7-day reading plans right on our website that we do through YouVersion. It takes you right into the Gospels. You read for yourself what Jesus was all about, what he said about himself. That's the number one thing that people do, when they go to the site. So we're just trying to create a little bit of surprise, catch their attention, whet their appetite. It's not meant to be the whole thing. It's 7
Right.
seconds or 30 seconds, and then you go from there.
Well, how much of the critique that you're getting is just based in that reality of, you have a lot of money, it sounds like, that has been funded by your funders, $100 million, you're spending it in Super Bowl or MLB games, but those are expensive buys, so you only can afford a 10, 15-second spot. So you obviously have to choose very carefully what you present. How much of the negative reaction to what you have would you just chalk up to, yeah, you're right, Jesus is the Son of God, I can't get into the Trinitarian theology in 15 seconds, I've got to pick my spots here? Like how much of that is actually the heart of the controversy here?
Yeah, there's some of that there. We're also in the same, we're doing a lot of work with the Chosen as well. And so we have something called Campaign for Christ. And so, he gets us is really focused on, okay, let's just raise the respect and personal relevancy of Jesus among people who are open but very skeptical. The Chosen, it fits another bill, which is really focused on engaged Christians where they see the full authentic Jesus for who he was. It's a lot clearer in the series. And so we're doing a lot of things to get ready for season 3, which comes out here just in a few weeks. They have a huge theatrical release coming up. So a number of these things, our group is working together in a coordinated way to make sure that there are different offerings for different points within a person's spiritual journey. And then just knowing, hey, each person is on their own journey. We want to give them full agency, full control over that. These are grown adults that make their own decisions. We can't tell them what to do. We can interest them. We can give them prompts, but we need multiple things within Christianity in order to help through this whole spiritual growth process.
So I have a comment and then a question, and they're completely unrelated. So let me do the comment first, and then I'll do the question. So the comment first that strikes me as interesting about this approach is that when it comes to Jesus, biography leads to theology and morality. So biography is an entree into theology and morality, because biography, in learning about who Jesus is, you're going to learn the theology of his identity. You're also going to learn the standard that he set. And that biography is a wonderful entry point into understand just this. The biography of the person of Jesus Christ is a wonderful entry point into Christianity. As producer Chris reminds us, it's resonant with our guest last week, David Skeel's own conversion story, and resonant with the story I'll never forget from hearing from a relatively recent Christian convert when I was just gotten out of law school. And he talked about how he became a Christian, and he became a Christian by reading. Someone just said, read the book of John, just read the book of John. And he read it, and he got to John 8, and he got to the start of the story about the woman caught in adultery. And he stopped reading. He didn't even read the rest of the story because he was so captivated by Jesus that he didn't want to see Jesus condemn the woman caught in adultery, because that was what was inevitable in his mind. That was the inevitable thing that would occur. And he set aside the book of John for a while, and then just was like, okay, I'll pick it up and keep reading, and kept reading and read Jesus' response to the woman caught in adultery. And it revolutionized his thinking about Jesus and his understanding of Christianity. And so this biography as an entree into theology and morality, I think, is incredibly powerful. So that's the comment. Here's the completely unrelated question. All right, let me put on a hat that says this, Jason. I'm with you on the idea that people need a biography. They need to know who Jesus was in a way that speaks to them where they are. And I think, if you see these commercials, that they do a really good job of that. But I'm not $100 million with you, Jason. That's a ton of money that can go to a lot of different things that might actually be able to, for example, improves people's material conditions. Is that a wise investment of limited resources to pour that much money into, reaching people with relatively brief messages about Jesus?
It's a great question. I love your comment. And I think in your comment, we're really captivated by the confoundingness of, he just, when you read the Gospels, you think he's going to act a certain way, and then he does something that you didn't expect.
Right.
And we just want to still be captivated by that. And I think that there's a great example there for us I think we need that more today now than ever. And I think what he modeled for us there was he had his beliefs and his convictions and his mission and purpose, but somehow he was able to show unconditional love to every single person he came in contact with. And the dignity and respect that he treated them with, like the woman at the well, like he still stuck to the morality, but at the same time, he also treated her in such a way, and we're like, wow, how would it look to really try to implement that today in our culture? So I love that comment and where you're going with that. Yeah, the question I think about the investment is a conversation that I have a lot with people, and I think $100 million, it is a lot of money. It's a significant amount of money to invest and put to a good use. A lot of times we look at it and we go, it's not enough, because what's happening in America is America is about $297 billion is spent in advertising just in the US alone. So some of our biggest brands, Geico spends $8 billion, State Farm spends $3 billion. most of these brands are focused on, buying and selling goods and services. And, you know, it significantly helps each of those brands when people know, oh, here's the basic offering and here's what the interaction is going to look like. And so when I go to Target or when I get a Starbucks or when I buy a pair of Nikes, like I understand a lot of things from their brand, and it allows the interactions to be much more frequent, much more smooth. The church really doesn't have anything like that. And so everything has to be done on the ground when it
Mhm.
comes to the church. And it's hard to do. It's really difficult. If you say you only had salespeople and you had no marketing effort whatsoever, and you're going up against consumerism, which has all the attention, all the love, and the American people go, well, I know what I'm going to turn my attention to. And so we're trying to do is just use the tools that are available to us now, like the printing press was, or like what the Roman Empire was during. I mean, Jesus came at a particular point in time because the Roman Empire had set the conditions for that message to spread. And so we're just saying, hey, guess what now? We have the tools of social media, digital media, connected TV, live sporting events. Why would we not want Jesus to be a part of that? He would get out there in the street, in the temple, in the largest events that were happening, and share his message. And we're just trying to do that within a modern context now. So we actually think 100 million isn't enough. We're ready to. We're going to more than double that budget here in the coming year. We're on a path to invest at least $1 billion over the first 3 years. And I think one of the things that we look at is, I think sometimes within Christianity, we have a way of making big things small, and we're a group that doesn't want to do that anymore. We want to make big things big. And we think that, we had Joe Gibbs come on board, and he's like, hey, I want you to, sponsor, one of our cars for a while. And when we talked about what we were doing, Joe said, is there a more important message that we should be sharing with the American people right now than the unconditional love and grace and mercy that Jesus offers? And he's like, I can't think of a more innovative way to get that message front and center. And so we're just getting a lot of opportunities, like to be on a NASCAR, to have a Super Bowl ad,
Mhm.
to sponsor major league sporting teams, things that typically don't happen, with a religious message. And because of this unique approach, it gives him a lot of entree.
Wow. So $1 billion on NASCAR, which Joe Gibbs is one of the major NASCAR
Not 1
owners, just
billion
for
on
those
NASCAR.
who don't know that. That's going to make a cultural impact, which then strikes me that the controversy that has been brewing around this is going to only get bigger, which means
Right.
I think there needs to be a kind of a response to that. And so I'm going to step in here. David just made a long comment and then kind of smuggled in a question. I'm not even going to bother smuggling a question. I'm just going to go with a long rant here for a moment. So giving a rant alert here,
Rant
a
away.
theological rant alert here. So from what I can tell, Jason, the most common critique comes from Christians who say, when you say Jesus gets us, you are not proclaiming the divinity of Christ. So I'll just read one online comment that I unearthed that I think sort of embodies this. This is says this critic says, the name of the campaign, He Gets Us, alone should raise at least a preliminary red flag for Christians. Generally speaking, when people or churches focus on the humanity of Jesus, an emphasis on the idea that he was just like us, it's to the exclusion of his divinity. But Jesus matters not primarily because he understands what it's like to be human, but because of who he is. In other words, it's only his identity as God himself that makes the fact that he gets us even relevant. If Jesus wasn't God, it doesn't matter that he understands what it's like to be human. So again, it seems to me, from what I can tell, it's you're not saying in this ad, front and center, Jesus is God. And I want to just say something to that for a fact. That presumes in this cultural moment, everybody understands what is the meaning of God. Right? That statement only is helpful if God is a clearly recognized term that everybody knows what that refers to. I've got a friend who believes we are all gods and goddesses. Okay, so that statement, Jesus is God, she would be like, cool, yeah, Jesus is God, so am I, and so are you. And that's out there. Or very prevalent are other understandings of God, like God is the absentee landlord, essentially, just sort of hovering over in some cosmic, kind of disinterested in the world. Or God is interested, but is interested kind of in a very kind of soft and sort of mushy kind of way. This is Christian Smith, the Christian sociologist, coined this term, moralistic therapeutic deism. And this is a term that he coined after studying the views of 3,000 youth, that basically God just wants us to be happy and feel good about ourselves and does not need to be particularly involved. That's the deistic part. The be happy and feel good about is the therapeutic part. And moralistic is just, hey, he just wants us to act good. So that's the predominant notion of the picture of God, as just a moralistic therapist and deist. Deist meaning somebody who's actually maybe God in a ultimate sense, but uninvolved and unengaged. So, you've got a range in our current culture among the spread diversity of American citizens. That term God has all sorts of meaning, from we're all gods to God is a moralist, therapeutic deist, to whatever, right? So it seems to me to insist on Jesus is God is saying Jesus is a meaningless statement unless you can describe the characteristics of God. And this is where I actually think your campaign is helpful, because you are actually you're trying to start filling out the definition of who God is before saying Jesus is God. You've got to say, like, Jesus is, our God was actually something of a rebel. Our God was actually somebody who welcomed all. And so that it just strikes me as this is fundamental to our cultural moment, that rather than leading with Jesus is God, we have to lead with who is Jesus, and then get to, and it turns out God is like that, and here's what we mean by God. So that's my long theological rant. I guess I have to ask a question now, which is, what do you think of that?
There you go. That's how you slip in a question.
Talk
How
about that.
Yeah.
Talk about
talk about the long
that.
point that I just made.
I mean, yeah. So I think all of those ideas sound really good, but I think what people who are spiritually open but skeptical are saying is they're just not enough. Somehow I feel a need for love, for forgiveness, for grace, for very specific things, and they have to come from somewhere. And we still have a vast majority of Americans who are like, I see those things best represented in Jesus. I am intrigued by his example. And then, when you read through the Gospels, it's very hard to separate the humanity and the deity of Jesus. I mean, we really try to write our Bible reading plans in such a way that somebody who was a skeptic would be like, thank you, that's helpful. Without making them consume everything about Christianity in the first conversation. I mean, it's how we interact with each other, but I would much rather have a conversation with somebody than not be able to have any conversation with them whatsoever. And that's what's starting to happen is people move away from it. And so I think, Curtis, to your point, some of the things that we assumed about sharing the message of Jesus with others, some of the commonality that was there maybe even 10 years ago, I think it isn't there as much anymore. But there still is a value system that Jesus represented. There still is a biography that people find very interesting. And it just provides a great entree into a much fuller understanding of who he is. But that process for some people can take years. I mean, sometimes for people it happens very quickly, maybe a matter of moments. But for many other people, that can be a lifetime quest that they're on. So I would think that we would want to nurture the spiritual journey of any movement towards a fuller understanding of Jesus. That all seems like positive direction.
One thing, just to circle back for just a second to the numbers, to put them in perspective. You had some numbers about marketing in general, advertising in general. I think another way of putting these numbers in perspective is to think of political advertising. How much money do we spend trying to influence people politically, often aimed mainly at inflaming each other, inflaming and pitting one American against another. And 2020 was the most expensive election cycle in American history. And the total expenditure was in that one cycle was $14.4 billion. $14.4 billion. Now, a lot of people might say, well, we're spending too much on political advertising. Maybe tough to argue with that. But then let's do another kind of comparison that I've used about where American priorities. Well, we spend $44 billion on pet food, for example. So this is a giant economy. This is a giant economy with a giant amount of expenditures aimed at winning swaying hearts and minds. So I think it's important to put these numbers in context here. 1 billion is a giant amount of money, and it is less than 10% of the amount of money spent in one election cycle, which is a pretty sobering kind of comparison, I think. So here's another. This is fun because we're just doing comment. That was a comment.
Jason, you're just here actually just to allow us to kind of go on our long rants.
I love this. These are great. This is good talk.
So here's a question. How did you choose the specific characteristics that you emphasized? Yeah. So if you go to the list of the ads that we're going to put in the show notes, The Rebel is a title, Outrage is a title, The Birth is a title, The Influencer, Dinner Party. Why'd you choose those?
Yeah. So, we're constantly doing research. We do what's called weekly continuous tracking. So every single week, we talk to over 800 people in surveys and just say, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? Respond to the ads, give us more feedback. I mean, insights from the American people are really the lifeblood of our campaign. We just keep listening and talking and asking, having this. And so we just say, what are people going through right now? Like right now, the main ad that we're running is called Outraged. And it's like, okay, we have a lot of economic pressure on us right now. People don't know what's going to happen. We're in the middle of this political season, and there's a lot of conversation back and forth. And people can get upset. People get uncertain. Did Jesus ever experience that? Did he have outraged people around him? Were there things that he saw where he said, that's not right, we should do something about that? Yeah, there's actually stories from the Bible about that. And so what we do is we look at the research that we're getting from the American people, and we study our Bibles, and we go, essentially a concept for an ad is just taking two separate things and mashing them together in a unique way that no one's ever done before. And then, C.S. Lewis talked about this idea of kind of stealing past watchful dragons. That how do you, we have a lot of defenses that are up, a lot of walls that are up. I mean, I have 3 teenage boys, so like getting a message through, I mean, you have to like craft it in a way that's not the same way that they've always heard it, where they go, that's interesting, you got my attention. And that's a really special moment when you can have clarity between communicator and recipient. And so, Dinner Party is just about, hey, there's this guy. It's an allegory. It's like Pilgrim's Progress in 60 seconds. Mm-hmm. This guy goes for a walk, and he sees what people around him are going through, and his heart breaks for them. He wants to invite them to a dinner and to sit down, not just so that they can eat and drink together, but so that they can understand each other and be filled with love and compassion and find commonality. Not that they would give up their uniquely held beliefs and convictions, but that they would be able to tolerate and understand each other. And that's what he launched. So, I mean, a lot of times in the Gospels, we see Jesus sitting there at a table, eating, interacting, having these conversations. And that Dinner Party is kind of our anthem spot. That's really what kicked off the whole mm-hmm. campaign over a year ago. And we keep using it. I mean, the level of relevance and personally involving, those are kind of the 2 key measures that we have. It's like over 85%. I mean, we just have not seen ads that connect with the American people in that kind of way, talking about a message of Jesus before.
Jason, I want to step back and ask kind of a larger scale question, which is the relationship between marketing and a relationship with Jesus. because you come from the marketing world, and I can tell you're a thoughtful guy. You're also really good at marketing in your career, and you're trying to. I get the sense that this is kind of a calling of a merging of your, life of following Jesus with your marketing skill and expertise. It seems to me there's when those two worlds come together, at least some people get a little suspicious of that, and I wonder if part of the suspicion that some people are having towards this campaign is like, this feels like marketing. And we've been sort of conditioned to be suspicious about marketing. And the reality is, this is marketing. You're a marketing guy. You're
seeker-friendly churches. Yeah.
Like yes, exactly. Yeah. So speak to that. Like, what's the benefits of the fact that you're bringing a marketing angle to this? And then, but what are the potential pitfalls? Because like, are those people who are suspicious of marketing, I don't think they're fully crazy. I don't think they're being fully irrational. They're feeling something that is rooted in some kind of legitimate concern or reality. So can you speak to both benefits, but also potential downfalls of mixing the world of marketing and the gospel?
Yeah, it's a great comment. I think people are right to be skeptical. I mean, people have been tricked a lot. People have been duped. I mean, there are just lots of things out there that aren't what they appear to be on the surface. It's healthy to be skeptical about things and go, well, let's read more, let's experience. So I'm always like, text us, chat us, start reading the Bible. Like most of the critiques that we get, then you'll ask, have you been on the website? And they're like, no, not really. Did you read it? Like, did you read the Bible reading plan? Did you go through it and just look at it as part of your daily devotion? And they're like, no, not really. So we're always inviting people in, but I think marketing is fundamentally now just storytelling. And we talk in our working groups a lot about how Jesus was like the perfect communicator. I mean, he would go in front of a group of farmers and he would tell a story about agriculture. I mean, you go all the way back to my name that we started with, and you're like, hey, Vanderground, son of the ground, he would talk, he would be by the Sea of Galilee talking to fishermen. Guess what? He would use fishing and I mean, he would just look at the context in which people were in, find something that they had in common, and he would go, okay, I want to explain a principle to you. I'm going to do it in a way that connects with your lived experience. And so that's all we're just trying to do. I look at a lot, I think God created all of our professional disciplines. I think that the discipline of journalism, the discipline of preaching and edification, of marketing, mathematics, science, these are all created and ordained by God. It's just how we use them. And yes, marketing has been used many times, unfortunately, to prey upon people's base instincts. So you can do a lot of harm with marketing. You can draw people into things that are really not healthy and constructive for a positive life. So we have to be very careful, but we do our best to focus on Jesus and the example that he provided as a storyteller, and we try to bring his approach through as we craft stories for the American people.
Well, everyone's had a comment period except for producer Chris. So I'm going to introduce the comment period for Chris because he's put a nice comment into the chat, which is relevant to this issue of how do you introduce Jesus? Well, one of the questions is, how did Jesus introduce himself? And as Chris noted, if it's not as if he led with, I'm the second person of the Trinity when he was introducing himself to his apostles, introducing himself to the public. He introduced himself as he was often walking in as a person first. And then and Chris brings up Hebrews 14, 15, and 16, which really kind of drives to the whole concept of he gets us. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So we don't want to be exclusive of the comment period here. And that, I thought that was a really good comment. And, the other thing that I would say in response to sort of this conversation about marketing, we've seen enough bad examples to know that marketing can be harmful. they're good examples where we know that marketing can be beneficial. It's not often in the what, it's often, as we talk about here, in the how. And one thing that I was thinking about as we were talking about this is how much the concept of he gets us, and this is, I'm sure, not going to be news to you, is connected to one of the biggest crises we have in our culture right now, which is a lack of a sense of belonging, a lack of a sense of isolation, a sense of loneliness. I've said this, I'm going to write about this in the near future, that I think the most important book of the last 25 years is Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, where he demonstrated through an avalanche of data that we're living more atomized and disconnected lives, that we are isolated from each other. And along with isolation comes loneliness. Along with isolation comes the feeling that we are not known, that we are not seen. And I guess this is probably no news to you because you went with he gets us. But was this something that you were seeing in the data as you were talking about and thinking about how to approach a very broad aspect of the public?
Yeah, even that verse that you read, I love that because it says in every respect.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, well, what about this thing that I'm going through? I don't think he understands that. And you're like, no, every respect, like everything. He understands and the whole point, I think, of that scripture is it's just saying you can have a lot of confidence when you pray because the person you're talking to went through everything that you're going through. And I'm like, that sounds a lot like he understands me. He gets us. And so I hear what you're saying about that need for belonging and the isolation and loneliness. And again, that's another one where, I mean, maybe we go into the Garden of Gethsemane with him, and he understands that he's about to be arrested and tried and put to death. And he asks his friends, will you hang out with me? Can you support me? Will you pray for me? Will you help me? This is going to be a long night. Like I could really use some friend. And they're not there for him. And as he goes through that evening, his personal relationships all start to peel away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a spot that we're going to be talking about coming up here in a little bit, really around the idea of forgiveness, because almost every human relationship gets severed on that night. And, as he's dying, one of the last things that he says is even, God, why are you forsaking me?
Mm.
That must have been how it felt to him, that everybody had deserted him. Everybody had left him. So if you feel stressed or lonely or at a loss for connection, I would think that he would have some understanding of what that's like. And so again, just if we could look at him and read about him and understand him and what he went through and see the commonality there and just accept that for a moment, that I think that's something that can be very healing and helpful for someone who is spiritually open but really skeptical about what the Christian message is all about.
Well, Jason, I want to follow up on this theme of relationships and how important they are, because I think the reality is if you talk to most people who came to faith, it was completely dependent on their relationship. So maybe they grew up in a Christian family and were introduced to Jesus by the relationship of their parents, or they were introduced in my case, the relationship to a vacation Bible school teacher when I was 8 years old, or somebody else was part of that. At least was crucial, if maybe even if not introduced, at least to the deepening and sort of fruitfulness of that relationship. And so Jesus moves through people. He moves through, and this is why he commissioned the disciples to be his witnesses, to actually spread the word that it was going to be carried forth through people. Jesus did not launch a sort of cosmic sort of marketing campaign in the sky where he broadcast his messages in some like skywriting in the clouds. It was through people. that he actually broadcasts his message in specific relationships, right? So that would be, I would think, a potential like question for this campaign is, okay, so somebody gets hit with a 15-second spot, maybe a momentary question or spark of interest is created by that 15-second spot, but that's not going anywhere unless it goes to a relationship with another Christian who can actually answer their questions, further love, care for this person, lead them into a larger community, right? This is how we come to faith. So I know you can't do all of that in 15 seconds, but it seems to me you want to try to link those 15 seconds of initial interest to that longer relational process. What's your strategy for doing so? What is it that you're doing that so that it doesn't just become a seed, to use Jesus' own parable, a seed that quickly dies and wither, a 15-second seed that dies by the roadside? What's your strategy on that?
Yeah, that's a great area to talk about for a little bit. I think one of them is it's really important to go from just campaign to movement. So you can only, you can only accomplish so much by putting ads in front of people. But starting a movement, and specifically we're interested in a redemptive social movement, which, targets a specific group of people and works to create significant change there. And so we're doing a lot of initial things. Like we just launched a merchandise section on our website, and you can't purchase these things with money. So you can go on, you can get a hat or you can get a T-shirt that says like, "Hey, Jesus was a refugee," because he was. He had to flee Herod. Hey, that's a relevant story today. Or Jesus was wrongly judged. He was. Every time he'd walk into a town, they would go, like, "Here comes that troublemaker and his group of rebels who are going to just cause us trouble." Anybody feel like that today? And so we have these shirts and T-shirts, and we say, you can't purchase them with money, but if you agree to forgive somebody or to welcome a stranger, you can have it for free, and then just tell us about it on Instagram. And so we've had phenomenal stories, like, somebody is like, poses with their water bottle that says he gets this, and like, "Hey, this is the first time I'm telling this publicly to the world, but I am publicly forgiving the man who took the life of my mother 25 years ago. It
Wow.
was her boyfriend." And they were,
Mm.
and things that, we weren't expecting that kind of a reaction, but to say, okay, in the example of Jesus, let's forgive and welcome and show compassion in his name. And then let's wear the hats and T-shirts that we got in exchange for that. So, that's one little way that we're working to really start a movement, this cascade of love. And the other is just facilitating connection. So when people come onto the website and they go, "I'm interested, and I'm reading," and then they go, "I would like a connection. Is there somebody who's a Jesus follower in my community who would they have coffee with me? Would they sit down and spend a little bit could we have a conversation together on my terms? And could I get some of my questions answered? Or I want to join a group like Alpha or another type of group that's just designed really to answer some of these questions." We would love to do that. But it's really up to the skeptic to say, "Here's what I want." And then it's our job to just facilitate the connection that they want when they're ready. And we find that model is one that just fits with how people, want to manage their lives in their growth trajectory today. So yes, we very much want to be able to facilitate that, and it needs to turn into actions. I think maybe going back to your earlier point about, wow, that's just a lot of money to spend on an ad campaign, and it really is. But if we were more oriented around Jesus and his example as an American people, and then if we did the things that he said, like feed the poor, visit the prisoners, clothe the naked, find homes for people that don't have home. Like, if a lot of people have said, we have all of the resources that we need in our individual cities to really tackle these problems. We don't need people to be hungry. We don't need people to not have any personal connect. We actually have plenty of resources. So what we're trying to do is just trying to orient ourselves more around Jesus and his example, do the things that he called us to. We think that's a great way to spend $100 million and a lot more than that in order to create that kind of cascade of love movement where we get to the core of some of these things that are really troubling us as an American people.
Well, Jason, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I think that's a good note to end on. That's a great way to end the conversation, and we really appreciate not just your perspective on what you're doing, and you're introducing who Jesus Christ is to the American people, and people that we often assume know who Jesus is, but we now understand that they really don't. I love a story. I was with my friend Russell Moore over the weekend, and he was talking to somebody. He was telling a story about how little we know about the character of Jesus. And he was telling a story about how a pastor was talking about the story of turning the other cheek, of blessing those who persecute you, of loving your enemies. And the pastor was accused of using liberal talking points, but that's core Jesus stuff there. And so the idea that, people know who Jesus is just fiction. And so this reintroducing or introducing the first time to people to the biography, the character of Jesus Christ is, it's incredibly important effort. And we thank you for sharing your time with us.
Yeah. And David,
I think you
you
have something to say.
Well, yeah, I was just going to tell listeners, we're going to put links in the show notes to those videos so that people can check them out for themselves. I really recommend that before people jump to judgment or a critique, that they watch the videos and understand what the campaign is trying to do. I think they're really well done. I think they're smart. They're in 15 seconds they convey some very important truths. And read the About Us if you have doubts or questions or wondering where this is all coming from. So, Jason, thank you so much for what you're doing, and keep us posted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Curtis. Thanks, David. Thank you, Chris.
And I just love Son of the Ground. Like that's fantastic. It's like the definition of keeping it real. Son of the Ground.
That's and that is from my father's father, who was a missionary in the Central African Republic from the 1930s to the 1960s, who I really learned contextualization from, because they learned the language of Sango. He picked up on the hunting practices and the agriculture, learned everything about that people group in order to contextualize the message of Jesus to them. And in a lot of ways, I just see it's just carrying forward that type of work, but we're doing it kind of right under the noses of people it's like parents that have learned math or science a certain way, and then your kids bring this homework home and you go, that's not exactly how I learned the subject in school. And you go, I know, but it is the same topic. And it's just a different. And so we're just trying to treat that skeptic as a unique people group who has a unique language, a unique culture. And we think Jesus is just as relevant there as he was, in the 1930s in Central Africa.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us again. And thanks, listeners, for joining us. So please, if you haven't done it yet, please go rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us out a lot. Also, check out Curtis's work at redeemingbabel.org, mine at thedispatch.com, and we'll be back next Saturday.